The Pilgrim's Progress in Modern English, Chapter 18. When they left the shepherds, they quickly came to the place where Christian had met a man named Turnaway, who came from the town of Apostasy. Mr. Greatheart, their guide, reminded them, "This is a spot where Christian encountered Turnaway. He carried the mark of his rebellion on his back, a symbol of stubbornness. This man refused to listen to any counsel. Once he had began to fall, no persuasion could turn him back." Greatheart continued, "Then Turnaway reached the place of the cross and the sepulchre. Someone urged him to stop and look, but instead, he gnashed his teeth, stamped his feet, and declared he was determined to return to his own town. Before reaching the gate, he encountered Evangelist, who tried to turn him back to the right path, even attempting to lay his hands on him. But Turnaway resisted, insulted him, and climbed over the wall to escape his grasp. They continued walking and came to the place where Little Faith had once been robbed. Here, they saw a man standing with his sword drawn, his face covered in blood. Greatheart called out, "Who are you?" The man answered, "My name is Valiant for Truth. I am a pilgrim, traveling to the celestial city. But along the way, 3 men attacked me and gave me 3 choices. First, to join their band. Second, to turn back to where I came from. And third, to die on the spot." He paused, steadied himself before continuing. "To the first I told them that I have been a true man for many years and could never join with thieves. They asked me about the second, and I told them that if I had found any true comfort or value where I came from, I would never have left it behind. But finding it unsuitable and harmful to me, I forsook it all for this path I'm on right here and right now. Then they asked me about the third option. I told them that my life was too precious to give up so easily, and besides, they had no right to force such a choice upon me. I warned them that if they attacked me, it would be all to their destruction." Valiant for Truth continued. "At this, the 3 of them, Wildhead, Inconsiderate, and Pragmatic, drew their swords against me, and I drew mine in return. We fought, 1 against 3. And for 3 hours, as you can see, they left their marks on me. But I left mine on them as well. They only fled a short while ago. I suppose they heard the sound of your horses approaching and they ran." Greatheart nodded solemnly. "It was 3 against 1, a great disadvantage." Valiant for Truth replied, "That's true. But numbers mean nothing to the one who has truth on his side. Though any army may surround me, my heart will not fear. Though war rises against me, I will remain confident. Besides," he added with a determined look, "I have read in the records of the one man who stood against an entire army, and how many did Samson slay with nothing but the jawbone of a donkey." Greatheart asked him, "Why did you not cry out for help? Someone could have came by here and helped you out." Valiant for Truth responded confidently, "I did cry out to my king. I knew he could hear me and provide invisible help, and that was enough for me." Hearing this, Greatheart turned to him and said, "You have behaved with great honor. Can I see your sword now?" Valiant for Truth handed him the sword, and Greatheart examined it carefully. Holding it up for a moment, he declared, "Ah, this is a true Jerusalem blade." Valiant for Truth said, "That it is. Give a man one of these blades, with the skill to use and the courage to wield it, and he could even face an angel without fear. Its strength will never fail. As long as the user knows how to strike, the edge will never dull. it cuts through flesh and bone, soul and spirit, and everything else. Greatheart remarked, but you fought such a long time. I'm amazed that you didn't grow weary. Vying for Truth replied, I fought until my sword cleaved to my hand, as if it had grown out of my own very arm. When the blood began to flow from my fingers, that's when the fight within me and all the courage I took, I had to will it up, but I could feel something burning inside of me that was beyond my own strength. Greatheart said with admiration, you have done well. You have resisted sin to the point of shedding blood. You shall stay with us. Come and go as one of our own companions if you would. They took Valiant for Truth with them. They washed his wounds, gave him food and drink, and refreshed him, and then continued on their way together. As they traveled, Greatheart, who was greatly delighted with Valiant for Truth, began asking him questions. Loving a man of such strength and courage, and knowing there were also weaker members in his company, he said, Tell me, what country are you from? Valiant for Truth answered, I am from Darkland. That's where I was born, and where my father and mother still live. Greatheart exclaimed, Darkland? Isn't that near the city of destruction? Valiant for Truth replied, Yes, it is. What caused me to begin this pilgrimage was this. One day, a man named Tell True came to our town. He spoke about Christian, who had left the city of destruction. He told us how Christian had forsaken his wife and children to take up a life on this pilgrimage, on this path. He also spoke of how Christian fought and killed a great serpent that tried to stop him on his journey, and how he reached his destination. Tell True described the wonderful welcome Christian received at the Lord's lodgings, especially when he arrived at the gate of the celestial city. He said, trumpets sounded and shining ones came out to meet him. All the bells in the city rang with joy, and Christian was clothed in golden garments. The man told the story so vividly, including many other details I will not recount now, but my heart burned within me with the desire to follow after Christian. Not even my father and mother could stop me. I left them behind to have come on this path this far in this journey with all my heart. Greatheart asked him, You entered through the gate, didn't you? Vying for Truth answered, Yes, of course. The same man, Tell True, told us that entering through the gate was essential. Without it, nothing else mattered. Greatheart turned to Christiana and said, Look at this. The story of your husband's pilgrimage and the reward it received has spread far and wide. Vying for Truth asked in surprise, Wait, is this Christian's wife? Greatheart replied, Yes, indeed, and these are his 4 sons. Vying for Truth exclaimed, What? They're on a pilgrimage too? Greatheart smiled and said, Yes, they are following after him. Valiant for Truth, his heart swelled with joy. That gladdens my heart. What a good man Christian is. How joyful he will be when he sees those whom once refused to join him now entering the celestial city after him. Greatheart nodded. Without a doubt, it will bring him great comfort. And the joy of seeing himself in the celestial city, the next greatest joy will be seeing his wife and his children there with him. Valiant for Truth, deep in thought, asked, Now that you mention it, I'd like to hear your opinion on something. Do you think we will recognize one another when we are there? Greatheart said, Do you think we will recognize ourselves in that blissful place and rejoice at the sight of our own joy? And if that is true, if we will know ourselves and rejoice in our state, why wouldn't we also know others and take joy in their happiness? Relations are, in a way, our second selves. Though earthly relationships will dissolve there, wouldn't it make sense that we would be far more joyful to see them present and to notice them absent? Vying for Truth smiled and replied, I see where you stand on this matter. Do you have more questions for me about how I began my pilgrimage? Greatheart said, Yes. Were your father and mother willing for you to become a pilgrim? Valiant for Truth shook his head. Oh no. They did everything they could to persuade me to stay at home. Greatheart asked, "What did they say to discourage you?" Valiant for Truth answered, "They said, it was an idle and lazy life. If I weren't already inclined towards sloth," they claimed, "I would never even consider the Pilgrim's path." Greatheart continued, "And what else did they say?" Valiant for Truth said, "They told me it was the most dangerous path in the entire world. The very way of death," they said. Greatheart leaned forward. "And did they explain how it was dangerous?" Valiant for Truth nodded. "Yes, in many ways." Greatheart urged him, "Well, tell us something. Tell us, what did they say?" Well, then Valiant for Truth began to list them. They told me about the Slough of Despond, where Christian was nearly drowned in his despair. They said there were archers stationed at Beelzebub's castle, ready to shoot anyone who dared knock at the wicket gate for entrance. They warned me of the dark forest and the mountains, of the hill of difficulty and the lions. They also told me about 3 terrific giants, Bloody Man, Maul, and Slaygood. They spoke of the foul fiends and the haunted valley of humiliation, nearly costing Christian his life. Then they described the valley of the shadow of death, filled with hobgoblins, where the light itself becomes darkness, and where the path is treacherous with snares, pits, and traps at every turn. They also mention giant despair and doubting castle, and the ruin that pilgrims often meet there. Beyond that, they warned me about the enchanted ground, which is full of danger. Finally, they told me of a great river without a bridge, lying between the pilgrim and the celestial city. Greatheart asked, "And was that all?" Valiant for Truth shook his head. "No, there was more. They told me the road's full of deceivers, people waiting to lead good men off the path." Greatheart asked, How did they explain all this to you?" Valiant for Truth replied, "Well, here's what they did. They warned me about Mr. Worldly Wise Man, who lies in wait to mislead pilgrims. They also spoke of formality and hypocrisy, always walking along the path. They warned me about buy-ins, talkative, and Demas, who might try to pull me away. They mentioned the flatterer, who would try to trap me in his net, and how I might become like green-handed ignorance, presuming to reach the gate, but instead being turned back to the hole in the hillside and the byway that is known as the byway to hell." Greatheart said, "I must say, that was enough to discourage anyone." "Well, let me tell me, brother, did they stop there?" Valiant for Truth shook his head again and said, "No, listen, man, they also told me about many who had traveled this path before, hoping to find the glory that they had heard so much about, just like I'd heard about. But after traveling a long, long way, they came back, mocking themselves for ever setting foot on the road. Everyone in the country laughed at them. They even named some of these people obstinate and pliable, mistrust and timorous, turn away and old atheists, along with many others. They said some had gone far but found no reward worth all that work, and then they turned around and they came back home and they were mocked by everybody." Greatheart asked, "Did they say anything more to try to discourage you from coming this way and becoming a pilgrim?" Valiant for Truth said, "Yes. They told me about a man named Mr. Fearing, who was also a pilgrim. They said his journey was so lonely and so fearful that he never had a single hour of comfort along the way. They also told me about Mr. Despondency, who nearly starved to death on the path. And oh, I almost forgot. They claimed that Christian himself, the one whose story had caused such a stir, after all his adventures for the celestial crown, was drowned in the Black River and never made it a step further. Of course, they tried to keep that part quiet." Greatheart asked, "And none of these tales discouraged you?" Valiant for Truth replied with confidence, "No, they all seem like nothing to me." Greatheart pressed further. How is that possible? Valiant for Truth smiled and said, because I still believe what Mr. Telltrue had told me. His words carried me beyond all their fears and their doubts. Greatheart nodded. Then your victory was your faith. Valiant for Truth agreed. Yes, it was. I believed. And that belief drove me to set out on this path. I entered the way, faced every challenge, fought against all who tried to stop me, and by faith, I have made it to this place right here and right now where I stand and I talk to you, my friends. By this time, they had reached the enchanted ground, a place where the air itself seemed to lull travelers to sleep. The land was overgrown with briars and thorns, except for a few enchanted arbors scattered throughout. These arbors were dangerous. If a man sat in one or fell asleep there, it was said that he might never rise or wake again in this world. Carefully, they made their way through the forest. Mr. Greatheart led the group as their guide, while Mr. Valiant for Truth guarded the rear to protect them just in case an enemy, a dragon, a giant, or a thief might attack them from behind. Every man held his sword drawn in his hand, for they all knew the dangers of this place. And as they walked, they encouraged one another with words of cheer. Mr. Greatheart commanded Mr. Feeble Mind to walk directly behind him for added protection. Meanwhile, Mr. Valiant for Truth kept a watchful eye on Mr. Despondency, ensuring his safety as they pressed forward. They hadn't gone far before a thick mist of deep darkness fell upon them, so heavy that for a long time they could barely see one another. They were forced to rely on words, calling out to each other to stay connected, for they could not walk by sight. Anyone might imagine how difficult this journey was for even the strongest among them. But how much worse it was for the women and children, whose feet and hearts were more tender. Yet, through the encouraging words of one another leading at the front and the one guarding at the rear, they managed to press on step by step all along the way. The path here was treacherous, full of dirt and slippery mud. There wasn't a single inn or shelter anywhere along the way to provide rest or refreshment for the weak. Here, groans and sighs filled the air. One pilgrim tripped over a bush. Another one got stuck in the mud, and some of the children lost their shoes in the muck. "I've fallen," one cried. "Where are you?" shouted another one. A third struggled, saying, "The bushes have caught me, and I can't get free." Then they came to an arbor, a warm, inviting place that promised rest for the weary. It was beautifully crafted overhead, adorned with greenery, and furnished with benches and soft seats. There was even a comfortable couch where the exhausted might lay down. Considering the difficulty of the road they had just traveled, this was a tempting sight. But not one of the pilgrims made any motion to stop there. They had listened carefully to the warnings of their guide, who had faithfully given them advice about the dangers ahead and kept them vigilant. In fact, the closer they were to the danger, the more they encouraged one another and resolved to deny any desire of the flesh to stop and rest. And the arbor was called the Slothful's Friend, built specifically to lure weary pilgrims into giving up on their journey. Well, in my dream, I saw them continue through this lonely land until they reached a place where it was easy to lose one's way. In the daylight, their guide could easily discern the correct path and avoid the wrong ones. But in the darkness, even he hesitated. Thankfully, he carried them along, and he had a map, and he used this map to help him see and discern all the roads leading to and from the celestial city. Taking out his tinderbox, he struck a light and consulted the map. The map warned him, be cautious in this spot, and to turn to the right. Without it, they might have all been swallowed by the mud. For just ahead of them, at the end of what that seemed to be the cleanest path lay a pit filled with deep, deadly mud, designed to destroy pilgrims who wandered into it. I thought to myself, who would go on pilgrimage without carrying one of these maps to guide them in the times of uncertainty? They pressed on through the enchanted ground until they came upon another arbor, this one built right by the highway. Inside the arbor, they found two men lying fast asleep. Their names were Heedless and Too Bold. These men had made it this far on the pilgrimage, but, weary from their journey, they had sat down to rest and fallen into a deep sleep. When the pilgrims saw them, they stopped and shook their heads, for they could see the pitiful condition of these men that were sleeping. They debated on what to do. Should we leave them as they were and continue on our way, or should we attempt to try to wake them up? After some discussion, they decided to try to wake the men up. But with this caution, they would take care not to sit down themselves, nor to be tempted to buy the comfort the arbor seemed to be trying to sell them. So they went in and they spoke to the men, calling each by name, for the guide seemed to know them. But there was no response, no voice, no answer. The guide shook them, and instead they could try to rouse them. They were shaking them, rousing them, trying to wake them up. One of the men mumbled, "I'll pay you when I get my money." At this, the guide shook his head, and the other said, "I will fight as long as I can hold my sword in my hand." Hearing this, one of the children laughed softly. Christiana, puzzled, she asked, "What does this mean?" The guide explained, "They are talking in their sleep. Strike them, shake them, do whatever you will, and they will answer you like this." It's like what we once said of a man who slept through the beating waves of the sea while lying on the mast of the ship. "When I wake, I will seek it again." You see, when people talk in their sleep, they say anything, but their words are neither guided by faith nor reason. There is no coherence in their speech, just as there was no coherence between their decision to go on a pilgrimage and their choice to sit down right here. He continued, "This is the danger. When those who are heedless set out on a pilgrimage, it is all too common for them to end up just like this. The enchanted ground is one of the enemy's last strongholds against pilgrims. That's why it's placed so close to the journey's end. The enemy thinks, when all these fools are so likely to sit down and rest, that right here, when they're exhausted, this is where I will put this. When they are tired, and when they are most likely to be exhausted, when they are almost at the end of their journey. This is why the enchanted ground is situated so near the land of Beulah, so close to the finish line. Pilgrims must take care lest they end up like these right here that we're looking at. These who have fallen asleep and they cannot be woken. Hearing this, the pilgrims were filled with fear and trembling. They longed to press forward and to ask their guide to light the lantern so they could see their way through the rest of the darkness. The guide struck a light, and with the help of the lantern, they continued their journey through the darkness around the same way that they came in. They're walking away to remain heavy and oppressive as they make their way out. The children, however, they grew weary and began crying out. Soon after, a wind arose and swept away the fog, clearing the air. Though they were still on the enchanted ground, they could now see one another more clearly and better discern the path ahead. As they neared the end of the enchanted ground, they heard a solemn sound coming from just ahead. A voice with deep concern, moving closer. they saw a man kneeling, with his hands and his eyes lifted toward heaven, speaking earnestly to someone above. They approached quietly, unable to hear his words, but watching as he prayed with great fervor. When he finished, he stood and began running toward the celestial city. Mr. Greatheart called after him, "Hello, friend! Let us travel together if you are, as I suspect, headed for the celestial city." The man stopped, and the group caught up to him. As soon as Mr. Honest saw him, he exclaimed, "I know this man." Mr. Valiant for Truth turned to him and asked, "Pray, then tell us, who is he?" Mr. Honest replied, "He comes from the same region as I. His name is Standfast, and he is truly a good and faithful pilgrim." So they came together, and Standfast called out, "Oh, Father Honest, is that you?" "Indeed it is," replied Mr. Honest, "as surely as you are here yourself." "I am so glad," said Mr. Standfast, "to have found you on this road." I am just as glad," replied Mr. Honest, "to have seen you on your knees." Mr. Steadfast blushed deeply and asked, "Did you really see me?" "Yes, I did," said Mr. Honest, "and my heart was gladdened at the sight." "What did you think?" Steadfast asked. "What could I think?" said Mr. Honest. "I thought, surely here is an honest man on the road, and I hope to have your company soon enough." Steadfast said humbly, "Well, if you thought well of me, then I am blessed, but I am not as I should be. The burden is mine alone to bear." Mr. Honest replied, "That may be true, but your fear and humility confirm to me that all is right between the Prince of Pilgrims and your soul. For as it is said, blessed is a man who always fears." Mr. Valiant for Truth then spoke up, "Brother, tell us, what was it that caused you to be on your knees just now? Was it some great mercy that you were giving thanks for, or is it something else?" Mr. Standfast explained, "As you see, we are on the enchanted grounds, and as I was walking, I began thinking about how dangerous this place is. So many who have come this far on their pilgrimage have been stopped right here or destroyed. I thought about the peculiar nature of the death of this place and how it can bring such sudden end to a person's life. Those who perish here, they don't die from any violent affliction. Instead, their death is gentle. The disease lulls them into sleep, fills them with a desire and pleasure, and they embrace it willingly, unwavered to the peril that they're in. They don't even realize how dangerous this is." Mr. Honest interrupted, "Did you see the two men sleeping over there in that arbor?" Yes, said Standfast. "I saw Heedless and Twobold lying there, and I expected that they would remain there until they rot." He paused and then continued, "As I was thinking on these things, an old woman dressed in fine clothing approached me. She offered me three things: her body, her purse, and her bed. To be honest, I was tired. I was really sleepy, and I'm so poor as an owl. And I think she knew it. I rejected her offer once and again, but she simply smiled and dismissed my refusal. I began to grow angry, but even that didn't deter her. She came back with fresh offers and said that if I would follow her guidance, she would make me both great and happy. She claimed to be the mistress of the world and insisted that happiness comes only through her." Mr. Honest asked, Did you ask her name?" Standfast nodded. "I did. She told me her name was Madam Bubble." Hearing that only pushed me further from her, but still she persisted. "Finally, I dropped to my knees, as you saw, lifted my hands, and cried out to the one who promised to help me. It was then that she turned and she went away. Afterward, I remained on my knees, giving thanks for my deliverance. I truly believe she meant to stop me on my journey. Without a doubt, her intentions were evil," said Mr. Honest. "But now that you mention her, I feel as though I have either seen her on the road or I've heard about her somewhere. Maybe I read something about her." Standfast replied, "Hey, perhaps you've done both." "Madam Bubble," Mr. Honest exclaimed. Isn't she a tall, elegant woman with a somewhat dark complexion? Standfast nodded. Yes, you described her perfectly. Doesn't she speak very smoothly and end her sentences with a charming smile? You are spot on once again, Steadfast said. That is exactly how she acts. And doesn't she wear a large purse by her side, constantly fingering her money and as though it were the greatest treasure on earth? Asked Mr. Honest. Yep, that's what she does, said Standfast. Mr. Standfast then he said this. He said, it's exactly as you've described. If she were standing here right now, you couldn't have painted a picture more vividly, describing her actions more perfectly than what you just did. Mr. Honest replied, then the one who first drew her likeness must have been a skilled artist, and the one who wrote about her spoke the truth. Mr. Greatheart interjected with a stern voice, this woman is a witch. It is through her sorceries that this ground is enchanted. Anyone who lays their head in her lap might as well lay it in an executioner's block beneath the hanging of an axe. Whoever gazes upon her beauty becomes an enemy of God. She is the one who sustains all those who oppose pilgrims, keeping them in their splendor. She is the woman who has lured countless men away from their pilgrim's path. His voice grew stronger and he continued, she is a gossiper and a meddler. She and her daughters are always at the heels of pilgrims, praising the riches and pleasures of this world. She is bold, shameless, and unrelenting. She will talk to anyone, mocking poor pilgrims while lavishing praise on the wealthy. If there is a man in town known for acquiring riches, she will go from house to house speaking well of him. She loves banquets and feasts, and she is never far from a full table. In some places, she even declares herself a goddess, and people worship her. She has her schemes, her public venues of deceit, and boldly claims that no one can offer pleasures and treasures as she can. She promises to stay with families for generations as long as they adorn her and cherish her. She casts gold from her purse as though it were dust, luring others with her extravagance. Mr. Greatheart paused for a moment. Then he added with gravity, she craves to be pursued, praised, and embraced. She offers crowns of kingdoms to those who will follow her advice, yet many has she led to the gallows, and 10,000 times more she has dragged down to hell. Mr. Standfast grasped, oh, what a mercy it is that I resisted her. Where might she have left me? Mr. Greatheart replied firmly, where? Only God knows. But certainly she would have dragged you into many foolish and destructive desires, lusts that drown men into ruin and perdition. It was she who turned Absalom against his father. It was she who conceived Jeroboam to rebel against his master. It was she who persuaded Judas to sell the Lord and lead Demas to abandon the pilgrim's life. The harm she caused is beyond measure. She sows discord between rulers and subjects, between parents and children, between neighbors, between husbands and wives, between a man and his own conscience, and even between the flesh and the spirit. So, good, Mr. Standfast, be true to your name. And when you have done well, stand. At this, a mixture of joy and tremble swept over the group of pilgrims. Then, after a moment of reflection, they began to sing. After this, I watched as they entered the land of Beulah, a place where the sun shines both night and day. Here, weary from the journey, they took some time to rest, because this country was dedicated to pilgrims, and orchards and vineyards belonged to the king of the celestial city. They were free to enjoy any of the king's provisions. Yet, even a short time in this place was deeply refreshing, for the bells rang continuously, and the trumpets played such melodies and such sounds that they could not sleep. And yet they felt as rested as if they had slept deeply. In this place, the streets echoed with joyful cries. More pilgrims have arrived in town. Someone would respond, and many have crossed the water today and entered through the golden gates. And then another voice would shout, a legion of shining ones has come down into town. This means more pilgrims are on their way, for the shining ones come to wait for them and comfort them along through their trials. The pilgrims arose and walked about. Their ears were filled with heavenly music, and their eyes delighted by celestial visions. In this land, there was nothing offensive to their senses, nothing to disturb their stomachs or minds. The only expectation and the only exception was the taste of the water from the river they would soon cross. It seemed slightly bitter at first, but once swallowed, it was sweet. Here, records were kept of the names of the pilgrims who had traveled the path before, along with the histories of the noble deeds. People spoke often of the river, sharing how its depth and its flow varied for different travelers. For some, the river was almost dry, while for others it overflowed its banks. The children of the town would go into the king's garden and gather bouquets and flowers for the pilgrims, bringing them with great affection. In this place grew plants of every fragrance, every kind you could imagine. Every smell, every vision, every spice, everything was just beyond beauty and imagination. The pilgrims' chambers were perfumed with a scents during their stay, and their bodies were anointed with these beautiful oils to prepare them for crossing the river when their time came. As they waited in this peaceful place, their appointed hour, a rumor spread through the town. A messenger had arrived from the celestial city with urgent news for Christiana, the wife of Christian, the pilgrim. Word quickly spread, and they found the house where she was staying. The messengers presented her with a letter which read, "Hail, good woman! I bring you joyful tidings. The Master calls for you. Within 10 days you are expected to stand in his presence, clothed in immortality." After reading the letter aloud to her, the messengers gave her a token to confirm that she was a true servant of the king. The token was an arrow tipped with love, gently placed into her heart. Over the next few days, the token worked so powerfully within her. By the appointed time, she was ready to depart. When Christiana realized it was her time to come and that it was time for she was the first of the group to cross the river, she called to Mr. Greatheart, her guide, and shared the news. He responded warmly, "I am truly glad for you, though I wish the messenger had come for me instead." She then asked him how to prepare for her journey. Mr. Greatheart explained everything that needed to be done, assuring her, "We who remain will accompany you to the river bank." Christiana then called to her children and gave them her blessing. With great joy, she told them, "I have found comfort in the mark upon your foreheads. I am so glad to see you here with me, and to know that you have kept your garments as so pure and white as you possibly could." Finally, she gave what little she had to the poor, and instructed her sons and daughter to be ready for the messenger when he came for them. When Christiana had finished speaking to her guide and her children, she called for Mr. Valiant for Truth and said to him, "Sir, in every place you have proven yourself to be a true-hearted, faithful man. You are faithful all the way to death, and my king will give you a crown of life. I also ask that you keep watch over my children. If you ever see them grow faint, speak words of comfort to them, please, sir. My daughters, the wives of my sons, have been faithful, and I trust they will see the fulfillment of the promises made to them." Then she gave Mr. Standfast a ring. Next she called for the old Mr. Honest and said to him, "Behold, "Here is an Israelite indeed, in whom there is no deceit," Mr. Honest replied. "I wish you a smooth journey to Mount Zion, and I will rejoice to see you cross the river with dry feet." But Christiana answered with longing in her voice, "Whether wet or dry, I long to be gone. However my journey goes, I will have plenty of time to rest and dry myself when I reach my destination." Then the good man, Mr. Ready to Halt, came to see her. She said to him, "Your journey thus far has been filled with difficulty, but that will only make your rest sweeter. Stay watchful and ready, for the messenger may come at any hour when you least expect." After him came Mr. Despondency and his daughter, Much Afraid. To them, Christiana said, "You should forever remember with gratitude your deliverance from the hands of the giant of despair and from the dungeons of the doubting castle. That great mercy has brought you safely here. Be watchful, cast away all fear, remain sober, and hold on to your hope until the very end." To Mr. Feeble-Mind, she said, "You were rescued from the jaws of giant Slaygood, so that you might live in the light of the living and see your King with joy. But I urge you to repent of your tendency to fear and doubt his goodness before he calls you. Otherwise, when he comes, you may find yourself standing before him with shame on your face for that fault." The day soon came when Christiana had to depart. The road was filled with people who had come to watch her begin her journey, and behold, the banks of the river were lined with horses and chariots that had come down from above to escort her to the gates of the celestial city. With a final wave of farewell to those who stood by, she stepped into the river. Her last words were heard clearly, "I come, Lord, to be with you and to bless you." Her children and friends stood watching as she disappeared from their sight, carried away by those who had come to meet her. She crossed the gate with all the joy and ceremony that her husband Christian had experienced before her. At her departure, her children wept, but Mr. Greatheart and Mr. Valiant for Truth played upon their well-tuned cymbals and harps in celebration. Then every one returned to their places. In time, another messenger came to the town, this time for Ready to Halt. The messenger found him and said, "I have come from the one whom you have loved and followed, even upon crutches. My message is this: he expects you to sit at his table and dine with him in his kingdom the day after Easter. Prepare yourself for the journey." The messenger then gave him a token to confirm his message, saying, "The golden bowl has been broken, and the silver cord has been loosed." After this, Mr. Ready to Halt called for his fellow pilgrims and said, "I have been summoned, and God will surely visit you as well." He then asked Mr. Valiant for Truth to help him make his will. Since he had nothing to leave behind except his crutches and his heartfelt wishes, he said, "I'll leave these crutches to my son, who will follow in my footsteps, along with 100 warm wishes that he may be better than I have ever been." He turned to Mr. Greatheart and thanked him for his guidance and kindness before preparing himself for the journey. When he reached the edge of the river, he said with a voice filled with hope, "I will no longer need these crutches, for there are chariots and horses waiting to carry me on the other side." His final words were heard as he crossed, "Welcome, life!" And with that, he went on his way. Soon after, Mr. Feeble-Mind received word that the messenger had sounded his horn outside his chamber door. The messenger entered and said, "I have come to tell you that your master has need for you, and soon you shall see his face in brightness. As proof that my message is true, take this token. Those that look out of this windows, they shall be darkened. Mr. Feeblemind called for his friends and shared the news as he summoned his token that he had received. Then he said, "Since I have nothing to leave behind, there is no reason for me to make a will. As for my feeble mind, I will leave it here, for I shall have no need of it in the place where I'm going. It is of no value, even to the poorest pilgrim. When I am gone, I ask you, Mr. Valiant for Truth, to bury it in a dung heap." When the appointed day arrived, Mr. Feeblemind entered the river just as the others had done. His final words as he crossed is, "Hold fast, faith and patience." And so he made his way to the other side. After many days had passed, Mr. Despondency received his summons. A messenger came with this message, "Trembling man, you are called to be with the king by the next Lord's day, where you will shout for joy at your deliverance from all your doubts. And as for proof of my message, take this token, a grasshopper to weigh upon you as a burden." When Mr. Despondency's daughter, much afraid, heard this, she said, "I will go with you, my father." Mr. Despondency addressed his friend, saying, "You know what my daughter and I have been like, and how difficult we've been in every company. Our wish is that no one will ever entertain the despondency and slavish fears that we have carried, for I know they will try to attach themselves to others after our departure. To be honest, these are ghosts that we welcomed when we first began our pilgrimage, and we could never shake them off. They will continue to wander, seeking to burden other pilgrims, but for our sake, shut the door upon them to never be set free again." When their time came, they stood at the edge of the river. Mr. Despondency's final words were, "Farewell night, welcome day." His daughter, much afraid, crossed the river singing, though no one could understand the words of her song. Sometime later, a messenger arrived in town asking for Mr. Honest. The messenger found him and delivered a message, and it said, "You are commanded to prepare yourself to meet your Lord at his father's house 7 days from now. As proof of my message, all the daughters of music shall be brought low." Mr. Honest gathered his friends and said, "I am dying, but I will make no will. My honesty will go with me, and let those who follow be told of it." When the appointed day came, he prepared to cross the river. At that time, the river was overflowing its banks in some places, but in his lifetime, Mr. Honest had asked one name, Good Conscience, to meet him there. Good Conscience came and promised, offering him a hand of help to get across. Mr. Honest's final words were, "Grace reigns." And with that, he left this world behind. After this, word spread that Mr. Valiant for Truth had received a summons from the same messenger as the others. The token given to confirm his truth summons was this: "The pitcher is broken at the fountain." When he understood this, he gathered his friends and he said, "I am on my way, Father. Though the journey here has been filled with great difficulty, I do not regret a single trial I've endured to arrive where I am now." He continued, "I leave my sword to the one who will continue this pilgrimage after me, and my courage and my skill to anyone brave enough to claim it. As for my marks and scars, I will carry them with me as evidence that I have fought this battle faithfully. He who will be with me will be my reward." When the appointed day arrived, many accompanied him to the river's edge, and he entered the water. He boldly declared, "Death, where is your sting?" And as he waded deeper, he proclaimed, "Grave, where is your victory?" With that, he crossed over, and all the trumpets sounded joyfully for him on the other side. Soon after, a summons came from Mr. Standfast, the very same Mr. Standfast the pilgrims had found on his knees in the enchanted ground. The messenger approached him and summoned him, opened up his hands, which read, "Prepare yourself for a change of life. for your master desires you to be with him." At this, Mr. Standfast became quiet, deep in thought, but the messenger assured him, "Do not doubt the truth of my message, for here is your token. The will is broken at the cistern." He called for Mr. Greatheart and said, "Sir, though I was not often in your company during this journey, the time I did have with you has been most beneficial. When I left my home, I left behind a wife and 5 young children. I ask that when you return to your master's house, because I know you will go on your return, guiding more pilgrims, that you let my family know what has happened to me. Tell them of my safe arrival here, of the joy I now experience, and of Christian and his wife Christiana. Let them know how she and her children followed after their father and finished their journey well. Share with them what a blessed end she had and where she is now." With a gentle smile, he added, "I have little to leave except my prayers and tears, which I trust will suffice. Let them know of these, for perhaps they will prevail on their behalf." Then, in time, it came for him to depart. He made his way to the river. At that moment, the river was unusually calm. As he stepped in the water and reached halfway, he paused, turned to his companions and said, "This river has terrified many, and its thought has often frightened me as well. But now, as I stand here, I find it easy. My feet are set upon the same foundation where the priests once stood as they carried the Ark of the Covenant across the Jordan." He continued, "Yes, the waters taste bitter to the tongue and feel cold to the body, but the thought of where I'm going and the escort awaiting me on the other side burns like a glowing coal within my heart. My journey has come to an end. The days of toil are over. I'm going to see the head that once wore the crown of thorns, to behold the face that was spit upon for my sake. Until now, I have lived by faith, and here I say, but now I go to live by sight and to be with the one whose company I have longed for so long." His voice softened and he said, "I have loved to hear his name spoken. Whenever I saw the marks on his footsteps on this earth, I desired to set my own foot there as well. His name has been like sweet perfume to me, far surpassing all earthly fragrances. His voice has been the sweetest melody, and his face the light I have most longed to see. His words were my sustenance, my antidote in times of weakness, and has upheld me, kept me from sin, and strengthened my steps along his path." As he spoke, his countenance began to change, and his body grew weaker. With his last breath, he said, "Take me, Lord, for I am come to you." Then he was no longer seen by those at the riverbank, but oh, how glorious it was! The open heavens were filled with chariots and horses, with trumpeters and pipers, singers and stringed instruments, all rejoicing to welcome the pilgrims as they entered the beautiful gates of the city. As for Christiana's children, the 4 sons she brought with her and their wives and the children, I did not stay to see them cross the river. However, since I left, I have heard that they are still alive and remain faithful, growing the church where they reside for a time. If it is my lot to return that way again, I may provide further details for those who desire it. For now, dear reader, I bid you farewell, the end. And I say this to you, dear friend, if you've watched these videos and you have been with me all the way through the Pilgrim's Progress in Modern English, thank you. Blessings to you. I would love to hear from you in the comments. That would be a blessing to me, or to give this video a like. I'd appreciate that very much. Blessings to you, dear friend.